I recall vividly the instant I understood I had been confined within a barrier of my own creation. It was 3 a.m. in my Oakland practice space, and I had just performed the same sequence of punches for the 10,000th time. Impeccable technique, perfect form, utterly precise, and entirely, completely devoid of life. I paused there in the faint light, perspiration falling from my brow, and for the first time in years, I felt empty. No advancement, no development, no passion. That's when it struck me like a sudden flash of insight. I wasn't practicing anymore. I wasn't evolving. I was stuck on what I would later recognize as a plateau, confusing it with my ultimate potential, my boundary, my final stop. But here's the revelation that transformed everything for me, and it's the same truth that's about to dismantle every barrier you've convinced yourself is unchangeable. There are no boundaries. None. Zero. The barriers you perceive around your potential, the ceilings you bump into daily, they're not real barriers. They're plateaus, temporary pauses that most mistake for permanent confines. Right now, as you hear these words, you're standing on one of these plateaus. Perhaps it's in your profession, observing others advance while you remain in the same spot year after year. Maybe it's in your personal connections, encountering the same issues, having the same disputes, feeling the same separation. Maybe it's in your health, your creativity, your self-assurance. You've been pushing and pushing, and nothing seems to shift. You've started to believe this is as far as you can go. This is your boundary. This is your ceiling. But I'm here to tell you something that's going to transform everything. You're not at your boundary. You're not at your ceiling. You're not at your ceiling. You're just resting on a plateau, and you've forgotten how to ascend. Let me transport you back to Hong Kong, 1958. I was 17, convinced I was already a master. I had trained in Wing Chun for years under the legendary IP Man. My reflexes were swift, my techniques precise, and my ego enormous. I thought I knew everything about combat. Then one day, a Western boxer challenged me to a friendly match. This wasn't supposed to be serious, just a casual exchange between different styles. But within 30 seconds, this boxer had me completely baffled. His movements were erratic, unpredictable, unlike the classical patterns I had memorized. My perfect techniques suddenly felt stiff, mechanical, useless. I lost that match badly. Not just the fight, but something deeper. I lost my confidence. I lost my comfortable plateau of assumed mastery. And lying on the ground with a plateau says you haven't figured out how to go further yet. That night, bruised and humbled, I didn't see the end of my potential. I saw the beginning of my real education. You see, most people spend their entire lives confusing plateaus with limits. They hit a temporary stopping point and immediately start building permanent camps. They decorate their plateau with excuses, furnish it with resigned acceptance, and call it home. But a plateau was never meant to be a destination. It's aging ground. It's where you catch your breath before the next ascent. It's where you gather strength, reassess your approach, and prepare for the breakthrough that's waiting just beyond what you can currently see. Think about the last time you felt truly stuck. Truly stuck. Remember that weight in your chest, that frustration of pushing against something immovable. Remember how real those barriers felt, how solid, how permanent. Now I want you to consider this possibility. What if every single thing you've ever called a limitation was actually just a plateau? You hadn't learned to leave yet? What if every ceiling you've bumped against was actually just a flaw? You hadn't figured out how to break through. When I arrived in America in 1959, I carried with me not just my martial arts knowledge, but a dangerous assumption. I assumed that what worked in Hong Kong would automatically work in San Francisco. I assumed that my techniques, perfected in one environment, would dominate in another. But America taught me something crucial about plateaus. They're not just about personal limitations. They're about contextual limitations, environmental limitations, cultural limitations. The plateau I faced wasn't just about fighting technique. It was about communication, about culture, about finding my voice in a world that had never heard it before. Those early years in America were tough. I couldn't get decent roles in Hollywood because I was too Chinese for American audiences and too American for Chinese audiences. I couldn't get respect in traditional martial arts circles because I was challenging ancient methods with new ideas. I couldn't get students because people didn't understand what I was teaching. I was trapped on a plateau that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. But here's what I learned during those long, frustrating years of apparent stagnation. The plateau isn't your enemy, it's your laboratory. Every plateau contains within it the seeds of its own transcendence. While you're feeling stuck on the surface, something crucial is happening beneath. Your unconscious mind is processing, integrating, reorganizing. Your spirit is gathering energy for the next leap. Your soul is preparing for a breakthrough you can't yet imagine. The plateau that feels like death is actually gestation. It's where your next level of self is being born. I remember the day I decided to break every rule I had ever learned about martial arts. It was 1967, and I was in my training hall in Los Angeles, once again feeling that familiar weight of stagnation. I had been developing Jeet Kune Do for years, but something still felt incomplete, mechanical, limited. I was trapped in the plateau of my own revolutionary thinking. So I did something radical. I stripped away everything. Every technique I had mastered, every principle I had held sacred, every assumption I had never questioned. I stood in that empty hall with nothing but my breath and asked the most dangerous question a plateau dweller can ask. What if everything I think I know is wrong? That question didn't give me immediate answers. Instead, it gave me something far more valuable. It gave me beginner's mind. It gave me the courage to be ignorant again. It gave me permission to discover rather than just repeat. And in that space of not knowing, something extraordinary happened. I broke through not just one plateau, but the very concept of plateaus itself. I realized that limitations aren't things that exist in the world. They're things that exist in the mind. And what exists in the mind can be changed by the mind. But let me be clear about something. Breaking through plateaus isn't about positive thinking or wishful hoping. It's about fundamental shifts in how you relate to reality itself. Most people approach their limitations like they're trying to break down a brick wall with their bare hands. They push harder, work longer, strain more intensely, and then wonder why they're bloodied and exhausted with the wall still standing. But what if the wall isn't meant to be broken through? What if it's meant to be transcended? Let me tell you about the 3 types of plateaus that keep most people trapped in lives far smaller than what's possible for them. Understanding these isn't just intellectual exercise. It's reconnaissance for your own liberation. The first is the plateau of technique. This is where you've mastered a particular way of doing something, and that mastery becomes your prison. You get so good at your current approach that you stop looking for better approaches. You perfect the known instead of exploring the unknown. I see this constantly in martial arts. Fighters spend decades perfecting techniques that worked in one context and then wonder why they're ineffective in new situations. Your career plateau might be exactly this. You've mastered your current role, your current skills, your current way of operating, and now you're trapped by that mastery. You're too valuable in your current position to be promoted, too specialized in your current field to transition, too comfortable with your current methods to innovate. The very expertise that got you to this plateau is now the thing preventing you from leaving it. But here's the breakthrough insight. Your mastery isn't meant to be abandoned. It's meant to be transcended. It's meant to become the foundation for your next level of incompetence, your next level of growth, your next level of possibility. The second plateau is even more insidious. It's the plateau of identity. This is where you've become so attached to who you think you are that you can't imagine who you might become. You've defined yourself by your limitations, your roles, your past experiences. And those definitions have become your cane. I spent years trapped in the identity of being a traditional martial artist, even after I had already started revolutionizing martial arts. Part of me was still holding on to the safety of the old identity, even though it was strangling my potential. How many of you are trapped right now in identities that served you in the past, but are limiting you in the present? The responsible one who can never take risks. The logical one who can never trust intuition. The nice one who can never set boundaries. The tough one who can never show vulnerability. These identities aren't who you are. They're who you learn to be in order to survive particular circumstances. But survival strategies make terrible life strategies. The identity that got you to this plateau is not the identity that will take you beyond it. The third and most dangerous plateau is the plateau of possibility itself. This is where you've limited not just what you can do or who you can be, but what you can even imagine. Your dreams have shrunk to fit your current circumstances. Your vision has contracted to match your current capabilities. Your sense of what's possible has been carefully edited down to what seems realistic, practical, achievable within your current paradigm. This is the most subtle trap because it doesn't feel like limitation. It feels like wisdom. It feels like wisdom. It feels like maturity. It feels like being realistic. But let me ask you something. Where did your sense of what's realistic come from? From your past experiences? From other people's opinions? From societal norms? From what you've seen others achieve? Here's the thing about reality. It's not fixed. It's not static. It's not static. It's not even consistent. What was impossible yesterday becomes inevitable tomorrow. What was unthinkable in one generation becomes commonplace in the next. The human capacity for transcendence, for breakthrough, for shattering previous limitations is the one constant in an ever-changing universe. When I was developing the 1-inch punch, people told me it was impossible. The laws of physics, they said. You can't generate significant power from such a short distance. But I wasn't trying to work within the laws of physics as they understood them. I was trying to discover what was possible when you aligned every element of your being toward a single explosive moment. Body, mind, spirit, intention, emotion, all compressed into one devastating instant of focused power. The 1-inch punch wasn't just a physical technique. It was a metaphor for what becomes possible when you refuse to accept the limitations others have accepted. Your own 1-inch punch is waiting for you right now. It's that breakthrough that seems impossible from where you're currently standing. It's that leap that defies the logic of your current circumstances. It's that transformation that everyone says can't happen, but that something deep inside you knows is not only possible, but inevitable. The question isn't whether you have the power to make. The question is whether you have the courage to discover the power that's been waiting inside you all along. Let me share with you the exact process I used to break through every plateau I ever encountered. This isn't theory. This isn't philosophy. This is the practical methodology that took me from a street fighter in Hong Kong to revolutionizing martial arts, breaking barriers in Hollywood, and becoming a symbol of human potential that's still inspiring people decades after my physical departure from this world. Departure from this world. Step 1 is recognition without resistance. Most people, when they hit a plateau, immediately start fighting it. They push harder, work more hours, try to force their way through by sheer will. But resistance creates persistence. What you fight becomes stronger. What you resist becomes more solid. Instead, I learned to recognize plateaus the way a sailor recognizes changing weather patterns, not as enemies to be defeated, but as information to be understood. When you feel that familiar weight of stagnation, don't immediately start struggling against it. Get curious about it. What is this plateau teaching you? What is it asking you to release? What is it preparing you to receive? Step 2 is pattern interruption. Every plateau is maintained by patterns. Patterns of thinking, patterns of behavior, patterns of emotion, patterns of attention. It's attention. You've been running the same mental programs, following the same daily routines, responding to challenges in the same ways, and expecting different results. But true breakthrough requires pattern interruption. It requires doing something different, not just trying hard, just trying hard. When I was stuck in traditional martial arts, I didn't try to become a better traditional martial artist. I started studying boxing, fencing, wrestling, anything that would interrupt my established patterns and force me to see with fresh eyes. What patterns are maintaining your current plateau? What routines have become so automatic that you're running them consciously? What beliefs have become so familiar that you've stopped questioning them? What relationships have become so predictable that they're no longer challenging you to grow? Pattern interruption doesn't have to be dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as taking a different route to work. Sometimes it's as profound as questioning your fundamental assumptions about what's possible. But it always requires the willingness to step outside your comfort zone and into the unknown. Step 3 is what I call directional flexibility. Most people approach their goals like arrows shot from a bow. They pick a target, aim directly at it, and try to travel in a straight line. But life rarely works in straight lines. Obstacles appear. Circumstances change. New information emerges. The rigid arrow approach leads to frustration when the direct path is blocked. It adapts its route while maintaining its purpose. Your plateau might be telling you that the direct route you've been attempting isn't the only route available. Maybe you can't get promoted in your current department, but you could transfer to a different one. Maybe you can't break through in your current relationship dynamic, but you could change the context in which you interact. Maybe you can't overcome your limitation using your current approach, but you could transcend it using an approach you haven't yet considered. Directional flexibility isn't about giving up on your goals. It's about expanding your strategies for reaching them. Step 4 is energy redirection. Every plateau contains trapped energy. You've been pushing against something immovable, and all that force has to go somewhere. Usually, it turns into frustration, anxiety, anger, or despair. But what if you could redirect that energy toward breakthrough instead of breakdown? What if you could use the very power you've been wasting on resistance to fuel your transcendence? I learned this lesson during my early days in Hollywood. I spent months being frustrated by rejection, angry at the narrow-mindedness of casting directors, bitter about the limitations placed on Asian actors. All that emotional energy was being wasted on things I couldn't control. Then I realized I could redirect that same energy toward creating my own opportunities. Instead of waiting for someone to give me the roles I wanted, I started developing my own projects. Instead of being angry at the system, I started working to change the system. The energy was the same, but the direction was completely different. Step 5 is what I call dimensional expansion. Most plateaus exist because you're trying to solve a 3-dimensional problem with 2-dimensional thinking. You're operating within a limited set of variables and wondering why you can't find a solution. But what if the solution exists in a dimension you haven't yet explored? What if the breakthrough requires expanding not just your actions, but your entire framework for understanding the problem? When I was developing Jeet Kune Do, I hit a plateau trying to de-do. I hit a plateau trying to determine which martial art was superior. Karate versus Kung Fu. Striking versus grappling. Linear versus circular. I was trapped in comparative thinking, trying to find the one right answer. Then I had a realization that changed everything. The question itself was flawed. I wasn't trying to find the best martial art. I was trying to transcend the very concept of separate martial arts. I was trying to discover the underlying principles that made all effective combat possible. Once I expanded my framework beyond style versus style thinking, solutions became obvious that had been invisible before. Your plateau might be maintained by a similar dimensional limitation. Maybe you're asking which career path to choose when the real question is how to create a career that doesn't yet exist. Maybe you're asking how to fix your relationship when the real question is how to transcend the patterns that created the problems. Maybe you're asking how to overcome your limitation when the real question is how to transform your relationship to limitation itself. Now, let me share with you something I've never spoken about publicly before. The most powerful breakthrough technique I ever discovered came not from martial arts, not from philosophy, not from any teacher or book, but from a moment of complete surrender. It was 1970, and I had been struggling for months with a back injury the doctors said would end my martial arts career forever. I was told I would never kick again, never fight again, maybe never even walk normally again. I was 29 years old, at the peak of my physical powers, and suddenly facing the ultimate plateau. The plateau of physical limitation itself. For weeks, I fought against this reality. I tried every treatment, every therapy, every mental technique I knew. I pushed against the diagnosis like I was trying to break down a concrete wall with my bare hands, and every day the wall seemed more solid, more permanent, more final. Then one night, lying in bed, unable to sleep because of the pain, I did something I had never done before. I stopped fighting. I stopped trying to overcome. I stopped trying to transcend. I simply accepted the full reality of where I was. In that moment of complete surrender, something extraordinary happened. The energy I had been using to fight my condition suddenly became available for something else. Instead of trying to force my body to heal, I started listening to what it was trying to teach me. Instead of seeing the injury as an enemy, I started seeing it as a teacher. Instead of trying to get back to who I was before, I started discovering who I might become next. During those months of forced physical inactivity, I wrote down the philosophy that would become the foundation of Geet Kune Du De. I developed mental training techniques that would prove more powerful than any physical conditioning. I discovered that my identity as a martial artist was far larger than my identity as a physical fighter. The plateau that seemed like the end of everything became the beginning of something far more significant. But here's the crucial insight. Surrender isn't giving up. It's giving in. It's not about accepting limitation. It's about accepting reality so completely that you can see possibilities within it that resistance had made invisible. When you stop fighting what is, you free up enormous amounts of energy to create what could be. When you stop arguing with reality, you can start dancing with it. When you stop trying to force breakthrough, you create space for breakthrough to emerge naturally. This brings me to what I consider the ultimate plateau that every human being must eventually face. The plateau of the separate self. Throughout your life, you've been operating under the assumption that you are separate from your goals, separate from your potential, separate from the life you want to create. You've been trying to get somewhere, become someone, achieve something that exists outside of where you currently are. But what if the plateau experience is pointing you toward a more fundamental realization? What if there is no gap between you and your potential? What if there is no distance between where you are and where you're meant to be? What if the very seeking itself is what creates the separation? What if the breakthrough you've been trying to achieve has been available to you all along? Not as something to reach, but as something to recognize. I discovered this during my famous fight with Wong Jack Man in 1964. This wasn't just a physical contest. It was a battle for the future of martial arts itself. Traditional masters said I was corrupting ancient wisdom by teaching Chinese martial arts to non-Chinese students. They demanded I stop or face the consequences. Wong Jack Man was sent to represent traditional authority. If I lost, I would have to close my school and abandon my teaching. The fight itself lasted only 3 minutes. But in those 3 minutes, I experienced something that changed my understanding of combat forever. For the first minute, I fought as Bruce Lee the person, trying to prove something, trying to win, trying to defend my position. I was strong, but I was separate from my strength. I was skilled, but I was divided from my skill. Then something shifted. I stopped fighting as someone trying to win and started fighting as an expression of fighting itself. I stopped being Bruce Lee, doing martial arts, and became martial arts, expressing through Bruce Lee. In that state, there was no gap between intention and action, no delay between seeing and responding, no separation between the fighter and the fighting. I wasn't using techniques anymore. I was technique. I wasn't applying principles anymore. I was principle. The victory that followed wasn't Bruce Lee defeating Wong Jack Man. It was truth defeating limitation, authenticity defeating convention, wholeness defeating separation. This is the ultimate plateau transcendence available to every human being. The recognition that you are not separate from your potential. You are your potential. You are not distant from your power. You are power. You are not lacking the life you want to create. You are life creating itself through your unique expression. The plateau experience isn't a sign that you're failing to reach your destination. It's an invitation to recognize that you've never actually been separate from your destination. But this recognition isn't just a mental understanding. It's a lived embodiment. It requires practice, discipline, and a willingness to release every identity that depends on separation, limitation, and struggle. It requires what I call the martial art of being yourself so completely that the question of limitation doesn't even arise. Let me give you 3 specific practices that will help you embody this understanding. First, the practice of assume breakthrough. Instead of trying to create breakthrough, assume it's already happened and work backward. If you were already living at your next level, how would you think? How would you act? How would you relate to challenges? How would you spend your time? Start living from that place now, not as pretense, but as recognition of what's already true at a deeper level. Second, the practice of plateau appreciation. Instead of seeing plateaus as problems to be solved, start seeing them as natural rhythms to be honored. So, a plateau is where integration happens. It's where your nervous system catches up with your expansion. It's where you consolidate your gains before the next leap. When you stop fighting plateaus and start appreciating them, they become launching pads instead of landing strips. Third, the practice of limitation alchemy. Every limitation contains within it the seed of its transcendence. Instead of trying to overcome your limitations, learn to alchemize them, transform them into gateways, into teachers, into fuel for your evolution. Your greatest weakness, fully embraced and understood, becomes your greatest strength. Your biggest obstacle, completely accepted and integrated, becomes your most powerful ally. Now I want to share with you something that happened to me in 1973, just months before my physical departure from this world. I was in Hong Kong, working on what would become my final film, Game of Death. The movie was about a martial artist climbing a pagoda, facing increasingly difficult opponents on each level. But the real meaning went much deeper. It was about the journey through successive plateaus of consciousness, each one requiring the release of what worked before in order to discover what would work next. On the top floor of the pagoda, the final opponent was meant to be Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, 7 feet tall, with an enormous reach advantage. Traditional martial arts wisdom said I should stay outside his range, use my speed, avoid his strength. But as I choreographed that final fight scene, I realized something profound. The real opponent wasn't Kareem. The real opponent wasn't Kareem. The real opponent was the assumption that size and reach were limitations that had to be worked around. Instead of advantages, I choreographed myself directly into them. Instead of staying at a distance, I moved close enough to nullify his reach. Instead of fearing his height, I used it as leverage for my attacks. The limitation became the solution. The obstacle became the path. The plateau became the breakthrough point. That scene was never completed the way I envisioned it, but the lesson it taught me became the completion of my understanding. There are no limits, only plateaus. But more than that, there are no plateaus, only pausing points on an infinite journey of discovery. And more than that, there is no journey, only the eternal unfolding of what you already are in the depths of your being. As we reach the end of our time together, I want to leave you with a challenge. For the next 30 days, I want you to live as if plateaus don't exist. Not by denying them when they appear, but by relating to them differently when they do. Instead of seeing them as evidence of your limitations, see them as evidence of your expansion. Instead of seeing them as problems to be solved, see them as mysteries to be explored. See them as mysteries to be explored. Instead of seeing them as places where you're stuck, see them as places where you're gathering power for your next leap. Every morning, before you do anything else, stand in front of a mirror and say these words: there are no limits, only plateaus, and I do not stay on plateaus long. Not as positive thinking, but as recognition of truth. Not as hoping it will become real, but as acknowledging what's already real beneath the surface appearance of limitation. Then, throughout your day, whenever you encounter something that feels like a limitation, ask yourself this question: how is this limitation actually a disguised invitation to expand? Don't try to force an answer. Just hold the question and see what emerges. You'll be amazed at how reality begins to reorganize itself around this new way of seeing. Remember, the plateau where you currently find yourself is not a problem to be solved. It's a platform from which to launch. The limitation you've been fighting is not a wall to be broken through. It's a doorway to be walked through. The ceiling you've been bumping against is not the end of your potential. It's the floor of your next level of expression. You are not separate from the breakthrough you seek. You are the breakthrough, temporarily forgetting your own nature. You are not lacking the power to transcend your current circumstances. You are the power, temporarily believing in circumstances. You are not stuck on a plateau. You are a plateau, temporarily identifying with stuckness instead of recognizing yourself as the infinite space in which all limitations appear and disappear. The greatest plateau of all is the plateau of believing in plateaus. And you, right now, in this moment, have the power to step off that plateau forever, not by trying to overcome limitation, but by recognizing that limitation was never real in the first place. Not by fighting your way to freedom, but by recognizing that freedom has been your nature all along. There are no limits, only plateaus. And you, my friend, you do not stay on plateaus long, because you are not just climbing the mountain. You are the mountain, temporarily pretending to be the climber, about to remember your own infinite height. Now go. The plateau awaits your transcendence. But remember, you're not trying to leave the plateau. You're simply remembering that you were never actually on it. You are the space in which plateaus appear. You are the awareness in which limitations arise and dissolve and dissolve. You are the unlimited expressing itself through the temporary experience of limits. Be like water, my friend. But remember, even water knows no ultimate limitations. It always finds a way. It always flows. It always flows. It always transcends whatever container tries to hold it. And so do you. Because that's not just what you do, that's what you are. There are no limits, only plateaus. And plateaus are just rest stops on the highway of your infinite becoming.